What's up everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of Persona Overview. In this series, we analyze the party members from Persona 3, 4, and 5 in terms of their affinities, stats, skills, and any unique mechanics they may have in order to determine how they should be built and utilized in the party. As per usual, our focus will be on the newest version of each game, those being Persona 3 Reload, Persona 4 Golden, and Persona 5 Royal, but we'll briefly go over the differences between the new and older versions for each party member. These videos will be gameplay focused, there shouldn't be any major spoilers if we can avoid it, but as always, we recommend to watch your own discretion. If you haven't played a Persona game before, we highly recommend giving the series a try. This episode will be focused on Junpei Iori from Persona 3. Junpei is available at level 1 when the party first enters Tartarus on April 20th, making him one of the earliest party members. His persona is Hermes of the Magician Arcana, which is also the arcana of his social link in the female protagonist route of Persona 3 Portable. However, he does not have a social link in any other version of the game. In Reload, he does at least receive a series of 5 optional linked episodes which fulfill a similar role to a social link. As for Junpei's availability, it is very good since you joined so early, but not quite perfect. He is unavailable for the boss battles September 5th and November 22nd, meaning there are 2 mandatory fights where you have to temporarily replace him. Outside of those exceptions, he can be used in every major fight after joining, so it's pretty easy to keep his level up throughout a playthrough.
Junpei's persona Hermes has a 50% resistance to fire magical attacks while having a weakness to wind magical attacks. In the first full moon operation, while the boss technically doesn't have a listed weakness, it's been found that this boss does have a hidden weakness to fire. This means Junpei's early game fire attacks like Agi will be doing solid damage against it, and makes him one of the most important party members for this fight. Not like it matters too much, as by this point you were forced to use only him and Yukari alongside the protagonist, of course. There are a couple of bosses that utilize wind skills, such as one of the June Full Moon Shadow bosses, as well as one of the bosses present in the Full Moon operation in October. The June boss is basically a tutorial, and you can't really sub out Junpei by this point, and for the one in October, this operation could potentially be a bit more threatening, but by then you have more than enough of a flexible roster at your disposal. Aside from these specific mentions, Junpei is a pretty good party member to bring as to a majority of boss fights, which extends to Tartarus mini-bosses too. Junpei's personality revolves around critical hits, and this shows in his Theurgy charge rates. He gets considerably more Theurgy charge from landing crits with his regular attacks or persona skills, gaining 10% with a regular attack and 20% with skill usage. Additionally, this goes up to 25% for both when critting an enemy boss. Comparing this to the rest of the party, they range from around 3 to 5% on regular attacks aside from Koromaru, and 3 to 10% on skill criticals. This means to charge his Theurgy as quickly as possible, you should focus on using physical skills and fishing for crits rather than using his magical skills. Junpei's first Theurgy is Hack and Blast, which deals severe slash damage to one foe, ignoring resistances. Because this Theurgy is single target, its power is quite high, and this can be amplified even more with critical hits, allowing Junpei to do insane amounts of damage with the Theurgy when properly set up. Most of the harder fights in this game consist of one strong shadow, or at least one strong shadow accompanied by a few weaker ones. As such, trading being a multi-hit skill for higher power is generally preferred, and it gives Junpei one of the highest damage ceilings in the game.
Junpei's stat spread is very clearly built around being a durable physical attacker. At level 1, he starts with 70 HP and 36 SP, eventually reaching 633 HP and 307 SP at level 99. His HP is the second highest in the party behind Shinjiro, surpassing other physical attackers like Akihiko and Aigis and giving him plenty of room to handle the HP cost of his skills. His SP is on the lower end of the party, especially compared to dedicated magic users, but it's not a major issue since he mostly uses physical skills, and therefore does not consume much SP. His strength starts at 3 and reaches 87, making it one of the highest in the party, with only Shinji once again surpassing him. Completing his first linked episode permanently grants Hermes plus 3 strength, bringing Junpei's strength to 90 at max level and widening his lead over Akihiko and Aigis. His magic starts at only 1 and reaches 46, which is among the lowest in the party and leaves his regular fire skills noticeably weaker than the ones used by dedicated magic attackers. However, they can still be useful for exploiting weaknesses and damaging enemies that block physical attacks. As for his endurance, it starts at 2 and reaches 71, placing him near the top of the party behind the especially durable Aigis and Shinji. Combined with his large HP pool, this makes him considerably bulkier than most of the cast and helps him handle the HP cost of his physical skills. His agility goes from 3 to 58, which is on the lower end of the party, although he still performs better in this area than Aigis and Shinji. This can occasionally hurt his accuracy, evasion, and placement in the turn order. Finally, his luck starts at 1 and reaches 53, placing him roughly around the middle of the party and notably above Shinjiro, Aigis, and Akihiko. This is not especially high for a character whose gameplay revolves around critical hits, but most of his critical rate comes from his characteristic, skills, and equipment rather than the luck stat itself. Overall, Junpei has excellent HP, strength and endurance, average luck, and weaker magic, SP, and agility, which cements his role as a physical specialist.
In order to unlock Junpei's combat characteristic, you'll need to spend some nights doing activities with him. His activities are gardening and reading, of which the latter is usually available on Mondays in the dorm lounge, while his gardening is typically available on Saturdays. Reading with Junpei gives you a couple of extra courage points when you do hang out with him, while gardening with him can yield tiny healthy tomato, rakukaja potato, refreshing amber onions, mini soul spinach, tiny golden tomato, and deflecting herb depending on what sprout you plan with him. Once you've done 3 sessions of gardening or 3 sessions of reading, you'll unlock his combat characteristic, Critical Boost. This characteristic increases both Junpei's crit rate by 5% while increasing his crit damage as well. Normally critical hits do 1.5 times the damage, but with this characteristic it goes up to around 1.8 times the damage. This boost stacks with skills like Apt Pupil, which makes gear selection on him pretty vital. Once you've done 3 sessions of gardening and reading, Critical Boost upgrades its critical amp, which takes the crit rate buff up to 10% and increases crit damage even further, effectively giving Junpei around 2.1 times critical damage when he does land one, which is really high. This characteristic is honestly just great, and is part of the reason why Junpei has a reputation of being this game's crit specialist. A crit rate buff is nice, but also increasing the amount of damage they do just raises his damage ceiling even higher. Overall, this combat characteristic helps Junpei be even more defined in his role, while also increasing the consistency of his insanely strong attacks.
Junpei is one of the broadest offensive skill sets in the party, with access to all 3 physical elements alongside fire magic. His innate power slash costs 7% of his HP and deals weak slash damage to one foe. At level 4, he learns Agi, which costs 3 SP and deals weak fire damage to one foe. Bash Follow is level 6, costing 7% HP for weak strike damage against one target. None of these attacks are especially powerful on their own, but having slash, fire, and strike cover this early makes Junpei very good at exploiting weaknesses in the opening sections of Tartarus. At level 13, he learns Vacuum Slash, which costs 14% HP and deals weak slash damage to all foes. Getting access to AoE physical damage this early is extremely good, and Vacuum Slash actually has a higher base power than Power Slash and Bash, so this is a big power spike for him. Assault Dive at level 18 costs 11% HP and deals medium strike damage to one foe, which is pretty much a strict upgraded Bash and becomes his main single target damage option. Miragi at level 22 costs 8 SP and deals weak fire damage to all foes. It's useful for knocking down groups of fire-weak enemies, although it is the only multi-target fire spell Junpei ever learns. Torrent Shot at level 25 costs 11% HP and deals weak pierce damage to one foe 2 to 4 times. Its damage changes considerably with the hit count, but even an average result is strong for the point when he learns it. The entire attack uses 1 critical check, so the extra hits increase his damage rather than giving Junpei several separate chances to crit. Agi Lao at level 29 costs 6 SP and upgrades his single target fire damage from weak to medium, which isn't going to make a big difference but is welcome anyways. At level 40, Junpei learns Blade of Fury, which costs 17% HP and deals weak slash damage to all foes 2 to 4 times. It is a much higher damage ceiling than Vacuum Slash due to its multi-hit nature, but its random hit count and lower accuracy make it a bit inconsistent. Gigantic Fist at level 47 costs 14% HP and deals heavy strike damage to one foe. It has no secondary effect, but remains useful as a stronger strike attack whenever an enemy resists slash or is weak to strike. Deathbound at level 54 costs 19% HP and deals heavy slash damage to all foes in one hit. It gives up Blade of Fury's multi-hit ceiling for more predictable damage and a higher critical rate. Vital Assault to level 60 costs 15% HP and deals heavy pierce damage to one foe, with 50% additional damage against a down target. Its high accuracy makes it an excellent follow-up after another party member knocks an enemy down and shifts to Junpei, although unfortunately its crit rate is pretty low. Agi-Dine at level 64 costs 12 SP and deals heavy fire damage to one foe. It gives him a stronger magical fallback, but his low magic prevents him from competing with his physical attacks against neutral targets. Brave Blade at level 71 costs 20% HP and deals severe slash damage to one foe with a very high critical rate, making it his main endgame attack against bosses and other single targets. His last skill is Vorpal Blade level 75, which costs 22% HP and deals severe slash damage to all foes. Its critical rate is lower than Brave Blades, but remains one of the strongest multi-target physical skills available to a party member, and works very well with Junpei's characteristic and endgame equipment.
When Junpei is first added to the party, he does not innately have any support or passive skills since he joined so early. This is eventually amended at level 9 where he gets his first support skill, Rakukaja. For 8 SP, this skill increases an ally's defense by around 40% for 3 turns. While it's nothing too impressive, learning a support skill like this at level 9 can definitely be appreciated for harder early game fights where enemy shadows can be somewhat threatening. Not only that, but Junpei himself is also quite tanky, so appreciates this buff even more. At level 16, he unlocks his first passive skill, Counter. This gives Junpei a passive 10% chance to reflect any physical damage back at the enemy who tried to strike him. He doesn't get another support or passive skill until level 33 where he simply gets Counter Strike, an upgraded version of Counter with an improved chance of reflection at 15%. It's also important to mention that these skills do not stack, and if you ever using them, it's imperative that you replace the old Counter skill with the new one. These skills are serviceable for the time, but generally can be replaced by more reliable support and passive skills, or just more varied offensive skills. Next up, he gets Fire Break a few levels later at 36, which for 12 SP, this skill will negate fire resistances of all enemies for 3 turns. Honestly, the break skills are pretty niche as is, and given Junpei's magic prowess is considerably worse than his physical abilities, I'd pass on this skill in the majority of builds. Not too long after, he gets a pretty solid passive, Shift Boost at level 44. This skill provides a solid 10% increase to attack until the end of a turn after the party member with this skill is shifted to. At level 51, Junpei gets his last support skill. Said skill is Muraku Kaja, which is the party-wide version of Raku Kaja, increasing everyone's defense by 40% for 3 turns at the cost of 24 SP. If you do not have Auto Muraku on one of the protagonist's persona yet, then having this skill for more difficult encounters to improve survivability is appreciated. Even if you already have party-wide auto buffs, having this as a failsafe alongside other party members who have party-wide buffs is a solid idea. At level 57, Junpei gets his last counter skill, High Counter, which takes the physical reflection chance up from 15% to 20%. For his final passive skill, Junpei gets Regenerate 3 at level 67. This passive heals him 6% of his maximum HP at the start of every turn in battle, which is relatively useful considering his heavy focus on physical skills, alongside the fact that he is a pretty tanky party member in this game. Overall, while it's not the most expansive set of passive and supportive capabilities, for how diverse his offensive skills are, this list is pretty great all things considered.
Junpei experiences a second Persona Awakening on November 22nd, when Hermes evolves into Trismegistus. He keeps his wind weakness, while his fire resistance becomes a full immunity. The other benefit of the second Awakening is the second Theurgy, Blaze of Life, which becomes available in the main story on November 28th. In episode Igus, it is unlocked after clearing B25 of Ptolemaea and returning to the dorm. Blaze of Life deals massive fire damage to one foe, ignoring resistances, and fully restores Junpei's HP. The base power is noticeably higher than any of the other party members' Theurgies, physical or magical. Also, the full heal works especially well for a physical attacker who regularly spends HP on his skills. Unlike his first Theurgy, this one can be boosted by Concentrate rather than Charge, as it is considered a magic attack. Since Theurgies are calculated from both strength and magic combined, Blaze of Life is the preferable Theurgy in a few situations. Due to the difference in base power, Hack and Blast does less damage than Blaze of Life unless you land a crit or have gear that boosts slash damage. And because of the heal it provides, it can also be quite turn efficient when Junpei is at low HP. However, Hack and Blast is generally more useful in a standard physical build because it can crit and therefore benefits from this characteristic.
Junpei gets a fair amount of useful skills, but only 8 of those can make it onto a final build. Let's get the obvious ones out of the way, as both Vorpal and Brave Blade make it onto the list. Being this game's physical attacker that's heavily focused on slash, we think it's pretty imperative that Junpei keeps his strongest form of single target and multi-target slash damage on his setup. Both do severe damage and have pretty nice crit rates, so they're staples of this build. Another physical skill that is pretty important for the build, especially if you don't use Igus on the same party as Junpei, would be Vile Assault. This skill does heavy pierce damage, which is nice for different types of physical coverage, while also doing 1.5 times damage to down foes. Honestly, this synergizes well with the fact that Junpei is more than capable of inflicting knockdowns with his wide variety of elements, as well as his critical hit potency. Speaking of coverage, Junpei also gets Gigantic Fist, which is his strongest strike skill. While there are other party members with stronger forms of strike damage, such as Akihiko and Shinjiro, for coverage reasons we think it's still worth to have this skill since his magic damage is pretty bad. Regardless, we still think having a strongest form of single target magic damage, Agidyne, is worth it for the sole purpose of being able to hit fire weaknesses in situations where it's called for. The rest of his skills are filled with some of his more useful passive and support skills, those being Muraku Kaja, Shift Boost, and Regenerate 3. Muraku Kaja can be used in tandem with other party members who have party-wide buffs, as I mentioned before, while Shift Boost and Regenerate 3 are nice small buffs to his damage and survivability. There are a couple of skills that you could also throw onto his build instead, such as Miragi for AoE fire damage, but as we have mentioned before, Junpei's magic damage is weak, and considering he rarely uses SP, spamming Agidyne to hit multiple fire weaknesses in a battle where there are multiple is fine. You could also slot in High Counter instead of Regenerate 3, but generally we find a slight passive healing more useful than having a somewhat low chance to reflect physical attacks.
Junpei's most consistent gear setup for regular gameplay is Masakato's Katana with the Nandaka Bracers. Masakato's Katana has 440 attack, grants +5 to every stat, and provides Apt Pupil, while the Nandaka Bracers grant Slash Amp. This gives him both a double critical rate from Apt Pupil and the stronger damage multiplier from Slash Amp without requiring any additional setup. Dojigiri Yasutsuna with the Omega Drive is a similar but generally inferior version of that setup. It combines Slash Boost with Apt Pupil, which results in less damage with Slash Amp and also misses out on the stat bonuses. The combination is still useful because both pieces become available earlier, and each component can remain relevant on its own before Junpei obtains his final equipment. Pairing Dojigiri Yatsutsuna with the Nandaka Bracers is dead stack Slash Boost and Slash Amp. This gives Junpei a higher damage ceiling when he does land a critical hit, but is less reliable to actually land a crit without Apt Pupil. Dragon Boots and Hollowed Boots create a similar choice for his footwear. Dragon Boots grant Auto Taro Cabellion, starting Junpei with both the effects of Taro Kaja and Rebellion. They're generally better for regular gameplay because they increase his damage, assuming he doesn't already receive an attack buff from other sources, and make his critical hits more consistent. Hollowed Boots grant Shift Amp, which stacks with Junpei's own Shift Boost and can produce a higher damage ceiling after it receives a shift, but they require more setup. A fire focus setup with Levitain and the Agni Bracers can stack Fire Boost and Fire Amp for Agidyne and Blaze of Life, so this is obviously much more niche than his physical builds. Hilariously though, this build gives him the single highest theoretical magic damage ceiling of the party, with the obvious exception of the protagonist. For a standard endgame setup, I would recommend Masakato's Katana, Armor of Light, Dragon Boots, and the Nandaka Bracers.
Reload is a game where physical is quite dominant, and as such, Junpei himself has quite a number of things going for him. Due to him being able to crit as a physical attacker, his damage ceiling is insanely high, as I've commented on multiple times. Aside from the protagonist, his is outright the highest thanks to said crits doing even more damage with his crit amp characteristic. Speaking of, the characteristic itself is extremely useful and glues parts of his kit together, making his playstyle more reliable and allowing for insane snowballing potential when you stack as much crit as possible on him. This is amplified even more by the fact that he starts with a severe single target physical Theurgy as soon as they are unlocked, which is amazing. It's something you will use constantly throughout the game, and the fact that you get it as early as you do is a great boon for Junpei's viability. The characteristic also helps charge the Theurgy faster, which again just shows how much the characteristic improves his game plan and playstyle. His damage isn't really crushed on his Theurgy though, as good as I may have made it sound. He gets a lot of good single target and multi-target options throughout the game, including Vacuum Slash, Assault Dive, Blade of Fury, Deathbound, Gigantic Fist, Vile Assault, and of course Brave Blade and Vorpal Blade. This also helps him cover plenty of bases, with him having access to 4 elements of Strike, Pierce, Slash, and Fire. He is the definition of reliable, despite having really high highs. Although I didn't mention this already, his strength is one of the highest in the game, so of all these insane crits coming off of him, the damage starting off is at a good point. Additionally, for a physical attacker, it's appreciated that he is one of the bulkier party members. Good endurance, really high HP, as well as having access to defense boosting skills and Regenerate 3.
Junpei's first weakness to discuss is his poor magic damage. His low magic stat means Agidine is mainly useful for exploiting fire weaknesses rather than serving as a reliable secondary damage option. This becomes a real problem against enemies that use Tetrakarn or resist all 3 physical elements. He does have Strike and Pierce coverage, but optimized builds heavily favor Slash through Slash Boost and Slash Amp. Because of that, Gigantic Fist and Vile Assault are usually much weaker than Brave Blade and Vorpal Blade unless they're hitting a weakness or Vile Assault receives its bonus against a down target. His Theurgies can be used to bypass resistances, but they won't always be available. Honestly, his lack of magic damage isn't really that big of an issue, considering Aigis and Shinjiro literally get no magic damage at all. His poor magic damage is still better than nothing. Overall, his real biggest weakness is just inconsistency. Physical skills are generally less accurate than magic, and Junpei's below average agility can make accuracy a real issue, especially in the early game before accuracy buffs and evasion debuffs are easy to set up. He really doesn't miss that often, and he's probably better off in this regard than Aigis, but missing an attack during an important turn can be pretty disastrous, so it's worth mentioning. More importantly, much of his damage ceiling depends on landing critical hits. Critical hits still work against most major bosses and reloads, so this typically just lowers the reliability a bit rather than make him ineffective in boss fights. The clearest comparison is Aigis, his main competition as a physical attacker. Junpei can surpass her when his critical hits land, while Aigis' Phys-Amp simply increases all of her physical damage by 20%. Junpei has a more explosive ceiling, but Aigis produces more stable damage from turn to turn. His utility is also fairly limited. Junpei learns Rakukaja level 9, but spending a turn to increase only one ally's defense is rarely efficient. He does not learn Rakukaja until level 51. Rakukaja is generally useful once he gets it, but Aigis learns the same skill level 40 and also has Dikunda, Healing, and Matarukaja. Akihiko gets Tarunda level 15, which is significantly more efficient than Rakukaja, especially for single target fights. He later learns Matarunda, Masukukaja, and single target healing. Junpei is primarily a damage dealer, so his limited support is not a fatal flaw, but it means he contributes very little when physical offense is restricted or raw damage is not what the party needs.
Junpei is a party member that is best suited in a physical focused team comp. By far his best party member pairing though is with Koromaru. Power Howling and Revolution are both tools he has access to, which are both extremely potent when used in conjunction with Junpei. Power Howling is what truly allows Junpei to reach insane amounts of damage, while Revolution is a helpful skill for increasing the reliability of Junpei's critical focused playstyle. Additionally, Koro's Auto Masakunda helps make up for Junpei's lower individual accuracy, specifically with AoE skills. Not only that, but like Junpei, Koro gains slightly more Theurgy charge when landing critical blows, so focusing on going for crits with him isn't always a bad idea either, because his Theurgy is very strong. A great member to round out the physical comp could be Aigis, Shinjiro, or Akihiko. All of them have their merit and can work since each respective member has a lot of potential damage output, but we think Aki is the best of the bunch. This is mainly due to the fact that the other two generally compete for Junpei's role, while Aki provides a bit of mixed attacking since his physical damage is extremely high as well, while offering decent elect damage at the same time. Generally, we'd heavily recommend Junpei, Akihiko, and Koromaru. If you want to run a healer on the same team as him, then we usually recommend Yukari over Ken. The main reason for this is that her Theurgy, Tranquility, provides a big damage spike with Junpei's Fire Theurgy, Blaze of Life. On top of that, she can keep him constantly healed thanks to her low SP cost supportive skills.
Junpei is generally less impressive in the original Persona 3, Fest, and Portable than he is in Reload. Physical damage is nowhere near as dominant in those games. In fact, it is often inferior to magic. The issue is that Junpei offers very little outside of physical damage in games that aren't very rewarding for physical attackers. His fire spells are held back by his low magic and lack of multi-target options with high base power, just like in Reload. Alongside his defense buffs, he does get Repatch from the older games, which allows him to assist allies who have been knocked down. I suppose any extra utility is better than nothing, especially since it's unlocked so early, but is an okay skill at best. it doesn't get close to making up for his lack of access to all the reload mechanics like Theurgy's and combat characteristics. He can still function as a durable physical attacker, but he rarely gives the party a strong reason to choose him over the other available options like Aegis. His endgame physical progression also leaves a lot to be desired. In the original Persona 3 and in the answer, Gigantic Fist is his last single-target physical upgrade, with Deathbound and Vorpa Blade as his last multi-target skills. The Journey and Fest and both Roots of Portable give him Brave Blade instead of Deathbound, but the older Brave Blade only deals heavy damage and has a low critical rate. It is nowhere near as useful as the version of Reload. Vorpa Blade, however, can deal excellent damage while Junpei's in great condition. This condition mechanic was something you had to worry about for all party members to some extent in the older versions of Persona 3, but it's not present in Reload. Trismegistus also gets the passive skill Spring of Life to restore HP each turn, which is marginally better than Regenerate 3. Those are useful strengths, but once again, they do not fully make up for his limited utility and weaker endgame options. Notably, unless you're playing Portable or Reload, you won't be able to control Junpei directly. His main purpose is to be a DPS with good coverage options, so his effectiveness can be drastically reduced by the AI prioritizing the wrong targets or choosing the wrong skills. Overall, Junpei definitely received one of the biggest glow-ups in Reload. He benefits a lot from his new crit focus identity, as well as the much more favorable environment for physical attackers and the heavier focus on burst damage due to Theurgy's. Still, he's not useless in the older versions if you don't want to try using him, but we think Reload raises him up from being a mediocre pick to one of the absolute best party members in the game when utilized correctly. That's about all we have to say about Junpei. If you enjoyed the video or have any thoughts of your own, please leave a like and make sure to comment. I also recommend checking the description if you're not already subscribed to both of our channels. Stay tuned for the next episode of Persona Overview next week on JCross' channel, where we'll be moving on to the next party member, Kanji Tatsumi from Persona 4. Thanks for watching.
Persona! You guys the last.
Wow, good job,
Let's
Junpei.
kick some ass! Attack!